Ethan Walker pressed the letter against his chest one last time, then dropped it into the fire without reading it aloud. He had written it 3 times. He could not send it. Not to her. Not when staying meant watching her choose a life she deserved, and he could not give. The morning was still quiet. The mountains were gold with summer light. He pulled on his hat, walked to his horse, and did not look back. Because looking back would have destroyed him. If this story is already pulling at your heart, subscribe to this channel and follow every part until the end. And drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Montana Territory, summer 1884. Ethan Walker did not say goodbye. That was the part nobody in Harlan Creek ever understood. Years later, when people talked about that summer, and they always talked about that summer, they would argue over whether he had been a coward or a fool. The old men at the feed store said coward. The women who had watched Abigail Carter move through town with that particular stillness she carried said something else entirely. They said he had loved her more than he loved himself, and that kind of love made a man do things that looked like cowardice from the outside and felt like dying from the inside. But none of them had been there the morning he left. None of them had seen his hands. Ethan's hands when he was calm were steady as stone. He had calloused them on fence posts and saddle leather and the rough bark of mountain pine. He had broken green horses with those hands, carried injured calves, through snowdrifts, split more firewood in a season than most men managed in 3 years. Those hands did not shake. They were shaking the morning he left. He stood at the edge of the Carter property, in the gray-blue hour before sunrise, when the summer sky still held on to a few pale stars, and the air smelled of dry grass and creek water. His horse, a dark roan mare named Cinder, stood ground-tied 10 yards behind him. She was already packed. Everything he owned fit in 2 saddlebags and a bedroll. He had not accumulated much in 18 months of working the Carter ranch. He had not tried to. In his hand was the letter. He had written it 3 times over 2 nights hunched at the small table in the bunkhouse after the other hands were asleep. The first draft had said too much. The second had said not enough. The third was somewhere in between, honest enough to be cruel, careful enough to give her room to breathe. He stood there reading it one final time in the early light, his lips moving faintly over the words. Then he folded it. He looked at it for a long moment. He walked to the fire pit near the bunkhouse where the coals from last night's supper still held a dull red glow beneath the ash. He crouched down. He held the letter over the coals. He let it go. The paper caught slowly, one corner going orange, then the flame spreading across his handwriting, eating through his words, sentence by sentence. He watched until there was nothing left. Then he stood, brushed the ash from his knees, and walked to Cinder without looking back at the house. He did not look back at the house because if he had, he would have stayed. And staying, he had decided, was the one thing he could no longer afford to do. The Carter Ranch had come to him the way most things came to men like Ethan Walker, sideways unexpectedly, through a door he had not knocked on. He had been passing through Harlan Creek on his way north, looking for seasonal work in the high country, when his mare threw a shoe on the main road, and he had walked her the last 2 miles into town, leading her by the bridle. That was a Thursday afternoon in late May, with the summer heat already building, and the mountains to the west still wearing a thin white cap of snow. He stopped at the livery. The farrier looked at Cinder's hoof and said it would be a day's work, and $2, which was a day's work, he did not have money for right then. He was calculating his options in the dusty street when he heard the argument. It was coming from the freight office across the road. 2 men's voices loud enough to carry the kind of loud that happens when someone is trying to keep something from boiling over and failing. Ethan would have ignored it. Other people's arguments were other people's business. But then he heard a woman's voice cut through both of them, clean and sharp as a blade. "I said I'd have the payment to you by the end of the month, Mr. Gould, and I meant it. Now lower your voice." He looked across the street. Through the open door of the freight office, he could see 2 figures, a heavy-set man in a town suit gesturing with a folded paper, and a woman in a work dress with her back straight as a fence post and her arms crossed over her chest. She was not backing up. The man in the suit was a full head taller than her and outweighed her by 100 pounds, and she was not backing up. Ethan watched for another moment. Then he tied Cinder to the rail and crossed the street. He did not have a plan. He was not the kind of man who developed plans quickly. He stepped through the door of the freight office and said, "Afternoon," in a voice that was quiet and carried anyway, and both men and the woman turned to look at him. "This a private matter?" Ethan asked. The heavy-set man Gould looked at him with the particular expression wealthy men reserve for people they have already decided don't matter. "It is." "Then I apologize for interrupting," Ethan said. He did not move. Gould's eyes narrowed. "I said it's private. You can leave." "I reckon I can," Ethan agreed pleasantly. "I reckon I will once the lady confirms she's all right." The woman turned to look at him more fully then. She had brown hair pinned back practical and loose strands from a long day's work across her face. Her eyes were gray, or maybe green. The light in the freight office was bad. Her expression was not one of gratitude. It was one of complete focused assessment, the way a rancher looks at a horse before deciding whether it's worth the trouble. "I'm fine," she said. "Then I'll be going," Ethan said. He tipped his hat to her, nodded once to Gould, and walked back out. He was untying Cinder from the rail when she came out behind him. "That was either very brave or very foolish," she said. "Probably the second one, ma'am." She looked at his horse. "You need work done." "Through a shoe." "Harlan's the only farrier in 20 miles. He's good, but he's slow." She studied him a moment longer. "You looking for work?" Ethan looked at her. "Passing through." Everyone who ends up staying in this valley was passing through when they arrived. She crossed her arms again. "I'm Abigail Carter. My father runs the Carter Ranch 6 miles north. We're a hand short for summer. The work is hard, and the pay is fair, and the bunkhouse doesn't leak." "I appreciate the offer, Miss Carter." "It's not an offer until you say yes," she said. "What's your name?" "Ethan Walker." She nodded once as if filing that away. "Well, Mr. Walker, do you have anywhere to be that's more important than a summer's honest work?" He thought about it genuinely. The honest answer was no. He had a direction, but not a destination, which was a thing he had learned to tell apart. "No, ma'am," he said. "Good," she said. "Follow me to the ranch after Harlan finishes with your horse. I'll tell my father." She walked away, not waiting to see if he agreed, as if the matter had been decided and she had simply informed him. He watched her go. Cinder huffed softly at his ear. "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "I know." The Carter Ranch was not the grandest operation in the valley, but it was real. Thomas Carter, Abigail's father, was a rancher of the old school, a man who had built everything he owned with his hands and his back, and 30 years of getting up before sunrise. He was in his late 50s, weathered to the bone, with a white mustache, and eyes that were the same gray-green as his daughter's. He met Ethan in the yard when they rode in, and shook his hand without theater. "Abigail says you're a hand looking for summer work." "Yes, sir." "You worked cattle before?" "Cattle, horses, fence, repair, irrigation, some carpentry." "Drink?" "Not while I'm working." Thomas Carter looked at him with that same flat assessment his daughter had used. Then he nodded. "Bunkhouse is through that door. Supper's at 6. We start at sunup. I'll tell you the wages over supper." "Appreciated, sir." "Don't call me sir. Tom's fine." He turned and walked back toward the barn. "Abigail'll show you where to put your horse." She did. She walked beside him through the yard, without talking, which Ethan appreciated. She pointed out the water trough, the grain bin, the section of the barn that was Cinder's for the season. She handled his tack with the ease of someone who had grown up doing it. When they were done, she leaned against the stall door and looked at him. "You don't talk much," she said. "No, ma'am?" "I don't either. Not with people I don't know." A pause. "Most ranch hands try to impress my father in the first 10 minutes. Tell him about herds they've driven and ranches they've worked." "Seems like a lot of words to use before you've done anything." Something shifted in her expression. Not a smile exactly, something quieter. "You'll do fine here, Mr. Walker," she said, and pushed off the stall door and left him alone with his horse. He stood in the barn for a moment in the warm summer dark, smelling hay and horse, and the particular sawdust smell of old wood. He should have kept riding north. He knew that already. He stayed anyway. The summer came in fast and fierce the way Montana summers did, blazing one week, cracking with afternoon thunderstorms the next. Ethan worked. That was what he did, and he did it without complaint and without performance. He was up before the other hands out in the fields before Thomas Carter made his morning round. He repaired fence lines without being asked. He noticed when the irrigation ditch to the north pasture was clogging and cleared it before the grass started to suffer. He was patient with the green horses and quiet with the cattle, and honest with his timesheet at the end of every week. Thomas Carter noticed all of it. He didn't say much about it, but he started leaving Ethan jobs that required judgment rather than just labor assignments that meant he trusted the man he had hired. The other hands were decent enough. Burl the foreman was a taciturn man of 40 who liked Ethan because Ethan did not need managing. A younger man named Pete talked too much and worked adequately. A hand named Crow, who never gave a last name, was the best horseman on the ranch and knew it and kept to himself. Ethan fit somewhere alongside all of them and between none of them. He had always been like that. The first real conversation he had with Abigail, a conversation not just logistics and task completion, happened 3 weeks into the summer, late on a Tuesday evening. He had been repairing a section of fence in the upper pasture that had been giving Thomas trouble all season, the old posts having rotted through at the base. It was work that needed 2 sets of hands to do right, and Abigail appeared at the fence line without announcement and picked up the other end of a post without being asked. They worked for 20 minutes in complete silence, getting the post set, packing the earth, testing it. "That'll hold," she said finally. "Should," he agreed. She looked down the fence line at the remaining section. "You're not what I expected," she said. He drove a nail. "What did you expect? Someone easier to read." She paused. "Most men you can tell within a week what they want. They either want more money or less work, or someone to impress them. You don't seem to want any of those things." Ethan considered that. "I want the fence to hold," he said. "That's enough for right now." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a good way to live, I think. Being satisfied with what's right in front of you." "It's the only way I know." She handed him another nail without him asking for it. "I used to be like that," she said. "When I was younger. Just what was in front of me. It got harder when I got older. There's more people around telling you what you should want. People have a lot of opinions about what other people should want." "They do." She looked at him sidelong. "You don't seem to carry much of anyone else's opinions." "I've moved around enough that they don't stick." She almost smiled. "Is that an advantage or a disadvantage?" "Depends on the day," he said honestly. She picked up the next post with him, and they kept working, and the conversation drifted into other things. The ranch, the North Pasture's water problem, the summer that was shaping up to be drier than usual. By the time they finished the section, the sky had gone purple, and the first stars were out, and they walked back to the ranch house side by side in the warm summer evening, not talking, which had become in a short time one of the most comfortable silences Ethan could remember. He was in trouble. He recognized it the way a man recognizes the early signs of a storm, not alarm exactly, but a particular quality of attention, a shift in the air. He was in trouble, and the sensible thing was to work the season out and move on. He had always been better at recognizing the sensible thing than at doing it. June became July. The summer heat settled in for good, the sky above the valley burning blue from sunup to sundown, the grass going gold in the fields. The work was constant haying season, which meant every hand on the ranch running at full capacity, from first light until they could no longer see. Ethan drove the hay wagon, managed the cutting schedule, organized the storage in a way that improved on what they'd done the year before, and earned him a nod from Thomas Carter that carried the weight of a speech from another man. Abigail worked alongside the hands during hay season. She always had Thomas told him one evening, had done it since she was 14. There was no pretense about her, no sense that she considered the labor beneath her. She stacked hay with the same focus she brought to the account books which Ethan happened to know about, because twice a week she worked on them at the kitchen table in the evening, and twice a week the kitchen door was open, and twice a week he walked past on his way to the bunkhouse, and caught a glimpse of her sitting there in the lamplight with her pen and her ledgers, frowning at a column of numbers. The third time he walked past, she looked up and saw him looking. He kept walking. The next morning she appeared at the hay wagon with 2 cups of coffee while he was hitching the team. "I didn't thank you properly," she said, handing him a cup. "For what you did in town, with Gould." "You didn't need thanking. You had it handled." "I did," she said. "But it mattered that someone else saw that he was wrong." She wrapped both hands around her own cup. "Gould has been pressuring my father about a freight contract dispute. He thinks because he's the largest shipper in the valley, he can bully smaller operations. He's been particularly pointed about it since my father's health has been unreliable." Ethan looked at her. "Thomas's health. His heart," she said quietly. "The doctor says he needs to reduce his labor. He doesn't listen." She looked toward the barn. "He built this ranch from nothing. He doesn't know how to step back from it." "You've been carrying more of the operation than he realizes," Ethan said. It was not a question. He had seen it over 6 weeks, the decisions that got made, the problems that got solved, the source of the judgment behind them. She looked at him with that assessing expression he was coming to know. "You notice things," she said. "Hard not to," he said. "When you're paying attention." A pause. "Most people aren't," she said. "Paying attention. They see what they expect to see." "What do they expect to see here?" She was quiet for a moment. "A rancher's daughter waiting for a suitable match so she can hand the problem of this ranch off to someone else." She said it without bitterness, just plainly the way she said most things. "That's what the town thinks. That's what Gould thinks. He believes that once my father is unable to manage the operation, the ranch will fail because I'm not capable of running it, and he'll be able to buy the freight contract at a fraction of its value." "Is he right?" Ethan asked. "About the capability." She looked at him steadily. "What do you think?" "I think," Ethan said carefully, "that you've been running this ranch since April without letting anyone know that's what you were doing." Something in her face shifted. It was small, a slight softening around the eyes, a breath let go. As if she had been holding something a long time and had just set it down. "Don't tell my father I said any of this," she said. "Wasn't planning to." He finished his coffee and handed the cup back. "Thank you for this." She took the cup. "Mr. Walker." "Ma'am?" "Ethan," she said. A correction, not a flirtation, just the decision to use his name. He looked at her. "Abigail," he said. She nodded once, turned, and walked back toward the house. He watched her go. For one moment he allowed himself, and then he turned back to the horses and began hitching the team. He was in significantly more trouble than he had initially assessed. The event that changed the summer's shape happened on a Saturday in late July. A man named Douglas Whitmore rode into Carter Ranch on a thoroughbred horse that cost more than most homesteaders made in a year. He was 35 and dressed in the particular way of men who want you to know they can afford to dress that way. He had a firm handshake and excellent manners, and smiled at everything, and Ethan, who was working near the barn when the man rode in, watched him dismount and felt something settle cold and still in his chest. Thomas Carter came out of the house to greet him with the warmth he reserved for people he respected or owed something to, and Ethan couldn't tell from this distance which one this was. Abigail came out behind her father. She was wearing a clean dress, not her work clothes. She had known he was coming. Ethan turned back to the wagon wheel he was greasing and worked on it with great attention. Burl appeared beside him 10 minutes later, looking toward the house where Thomas Carter was introducing his guest to his daughter with evident satisfaction. "That's Whitmore," Burl said. "Douglas Whitmore. His family owns the largest ranching operation in the North County. 3,000 acres. Ethan didn't say anything. "Word in town is Thomas Carter's been hoping for a match there since spring," Burl continued. He wasn't being cruel. He was just a man who communicated in plain facts. The Carter Ranch is good land, but it's got debt. Whitmore money would solve that problem clean. Good for the ranch, Ethan said. Burl looked at him sideways. Sure, he said, and walked away. Ethan kept working on the wheel. He was thorough about it. He was very thorough about it for a long time. That evening at supper, Abigail sat next to Douglas Whitmore at the table and was gracious and composed and correct, and Ethan sat at the other end with the hands and was equally composed, and everything was fine. After supper, Whitmore went for a walk around the yard, examining the operation. Ethan noted the way a man examines a property he's considering acquiring, and Ethan was stacking tools near the barn when Abigail appeared behind him. "Don't," she said. He turned. "Don't what?" "Don't say whatever polite thing you're about to say about what I know you're thinking." He looked at her. Her face was carefully neutral, but her jaw was tight in the way it got when she was managing something she didn't want managed. "What am I thinking?" he asked. "That Douglas Whitmore is a perfectly respectable man and a good solution to a practical problem," she said, "and that you are glad the matter is being handled sensibly." He said nothing. "Aren't you?" she said. The word came out with an edge she hadn't meant for it to carry, and she knew it immediately. He saw her recognize it in her own expression. "Abigail," he said quietly. "Don't." The word was sharper now. Not anger, something else. "Don't say my name like that." "Like what?" "Like—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, looked away, then back at him. When she spoke again, her voice was level. "My father needs this. The ranch needs this. And Douglas Whitmore he's a decent man." "I don't doubt it," Ethan said. He meant it. "Good." She straightened. "Good. I just wanted you to know that She stopped again. He waited. "I know what I'm doing," she said finally. "I want you to know that I know what I'm doing." He held her gaze for a moment. "I know you do," he said. "You always know what you're doing. That's not the same thing as wanting to do it." The color that came into her face was not embarrassment. It was something harder to name. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds, which was a long time for her, and then she turned and walked back toward the house without another word. He stood there with a hammer in his hand in the warm Montana summer evening, and he thought about what a man does when he is certain that the right thing and the good thing are not the same thing. He didn't have an answer yet. He would spend a long time looking for one. August arrived with a dry, relentless heat that cracked the creek beds and turned the high meadows to dust. The work was different in August, slower in some ways, more urgent in others, the season turning toward its end. Ethan worked with the focused quietness of a man who is making peace with something. He and Abigail worked beside each other most days and said what needed to be said about ranch business and very little else. There was a distance between them now that had not been there before, created by the name Douglas Whitmore, and they both respected it, and neither of them liked it, and neither of them said so. One afternoon in the second week of August, they were alone in the east barn, working on a piece of hay equipment that had seized up in the heat, Abigail handing him tools as he needed them, both of them flat on their backs on the barn floor, looking up at the machine's underside. It was hot and dirty work, and they were both focused entirely on the mechanism, and the naturalness of working beside each other had dissolved the distance for that particular hour. They were just two people solving a problem. "Hand me the half-inch," Ethan said. She found it by feel and passed it over their heads. "Is that the last one?" "Should be." He turned it. Something gave. "There." They both slid out from under the machine and sat up. Abigail had a streak of grease across her cheek. Ethan's shirt was soaked through with the barn heat. She looked at the equipment and back at him. "What caused it?" "Dust built up in the joint. Happens in a dry summer. You'll want to check it again before first frost." She nodded, making the note in her head. Then she looked at him. "Ethan?" He looked at her. "What would you do," she said, "if you were me?" He knew what she was asking. He thought about it honestly the way she deserved him to. "I can't answer that," he said finally. "Because what I'd want for you and what would be best for you aren't the same thing, and I don't trust myself to know the difference right now." She was very still. "That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in months," she said quietly. "I reckon it's the least I owe you." She looked at her hands, then at him. "He asked my father formally last week," she said. "Whitmore, my father accepted on the family's behalf." Ethan said nothing. "I haven't said yes myself," she continued. "Formally. There's a dinner next Saturday where I'm expected to confirm." She paused. "Everyone expects me to confirm." "What do you expect?" he asked. Her eyes in the dim barn light were absolutely clear and absolutely troubled at the same time. "I expect myself to be practical," she said. "I've always been practical." "That's not an answer." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." She stood up, brushed the barn dust from her dress, and left without looking back at him. He sat on the barn floor in the heat for a long time afterward. When he finally got up and walked out into the white August sun, he had made a decision. It was not a good decision and not a bad decision. It was the only decision he could live with. He would finish the season. He would not make anything harder for her than it already was. He would leave. The dinner was on a Saturday. Ethan was not invited. The hands ate in the bunkhouse while the Carter house showed light in all its windows, and the sound of voices and silverware drifted across the yard. Pete said something he did not hear. Crow cleaned his saddle in silence. Burl dealt a hand of cards to nobody in particular. Ethan sat outside this bunkhouse door in the warm evening and looked at the mountains going dark against the still bright sky and did not think about anything he would not let himself think about. At some point, he did not know what hour he heard the Carter house door open and close. Footsteps crossed the yard. Not toward the bunkhouse, toward the barn. Quieter than they should have been, as if someone did not want to be heard moving. He did not follow. He looked at the mountains. He stayed where he was. The next morning, Abigail came to the yard with the same composed face she always wore in the presence of the hands and told her father the irrigation in the north pasture needed attention, and Thomas Carter looked at Ethan and said, "Walker, you're on that today." "Yes, sir," Ethan said. He spent the day alone in the north pasture. When he came back at evening, Burl told him without being asked that the dinner had gone well, that Whitmore had made an excellent impression, that Thomas Carter had shaken the man's hand at the end of the evening with the satisfaction of a man whose problem had been solved. Ethan thanked him for the information. He went to the bunkhouse. He got out his paper. He started writing the letter he would burn 3 weeks later on the morning he left. He did not hurry through it. He did not rush. He wrote it carefully the way a man carves his name into something permanent, not because anyone will necessarily see it, but because it matters that it is done right. He wrote, "I have never in my life wanted to stay somewhere the way I have wanted to stay here. I need you to know that before I tell you why I can't." He wrote 3 drafts over 2 nights. He burned all 3. On a gray morning in late August, with the summer heat finally breaking and the first cool edge coming down off the mountains. Ethan Walker saddled Cinder in the dark, packed his 2 saddlebags and his bedroll, and stood at the edge of the Carter property one last time. He did not go to the house. He did not say goodbye. He tipped his hat to the mountains the way he always did when leaving a place that had meant something. Then he rode north, and did not look back, even though looking back was the only thing he wanted to do. Cinder carried him north for 3 days before Ethan stopped running. He did not think of it as running. He thought of it as moving forward, which was the only direction a man like him had ever known. But on the 3rd evening, when he made camp beside a shallow creek and sat down to eat cold biscuits from his saddlebag and found he had no appetite, he admitted to himself what he had been doing. He had been putting miles between himself and the thing that scared him most. Not Douglas Whitmore, not Thomas Carter's failing health, or the ranch's debt, or any of the practical realities that had made his leaving the only reasonable choice. Those things were real, but they were not what kept him awake that night, listening to Cinder move in the dark and the creek running over stones. What scared him was simpler and harder than any of that. He had looked at Abigail Carter standing in a barn with grease on her cheek, asking him what he would do if he were her. And he had known, with the particular certainty that only comes when something is already too late, that he would have burned down everything he owned to give her a different answer. That was not a feeling a man like Ethan Walker was supposed to have. He had no land, no name that carried weight in any county. He owned a horse, a rifle, 2 saddlebags of gear, and the skills in his hands. He was not the kind of man who got to want what he wanted from Abigail Carter. The world had made that arithmetic plain a long time ago. So he rode north, and on the 4th day, somewhere in the high country, where the summer heat had not reached, and the pine trees stood in silence around him, he stopped thinking about her entirely and started thinking about survival, which was something he was considerably better at. He found work inside a week. That was never the problem for a man with his hands and his reputation for showing up on time and finishing what he started. A cattle operation outside of a town called Bridger needed a seasonal hand, and Ethan worked there through September and into October until the season wound down and the cold came and he moved on again. He did not write to her. He had written enough. He told himself that every morning for 4 months, and by the 5th month, he had almost stopped needing to. What he found instead in a valley 2 days' ride further north than he had intended to go was an old man named Samuel Reed and a ranch that was dying. He came across it by accident, or what he took for accident at the time, though later he would wonder whether the particular accidents of a man's life arrange themselves into something that only looks random from too close. He had stopped to water cinder at a stock tank on the edge of a property and found the tank cracked and leaking and repaired it without being asked, because it bothered him to leave a broken thing broken. The old man appeared 20 minutes later on a slow horse and watched him work for a full minute without saying anything. "You didn't have to do that," Samuel Reed said finally. "Tank was leaking," Ethan said. "I know it was leaking. Been leaking 6 weeks." A pause. "I couldn't fix it myself." Ethan looked at him then. Samuel Reed was in his mid-70s, his hands bent with arthritis, his shoulders carrying the particular stoop of a man whose body has decided enough. But his eyes were clear and sharp and looked at Ethan the way Abigail's eyes had looked at him, measuring direct, entirely unimpressed with anything that was not the plain truth. "You got more work like this?" Ethan asked. 50 years worth, the old man said, "and about 18 months left in me to do it." That was how Ethan came to work for Samuel Reed. The ranch was 300 acres of high pasture and timber that had once been productive and was now hanging by the thread of one old man's stubbornness. The equipment was in poor repair. The fences were worse. The cattle were lean from 2 seasons of inadequate management. There was no bunkhouse. Ethan slept in a room off the barn and ate supper every night at Samuel Reed's kitchen table and listened to the old man talk about the ranch the way a man talks about his life's work when he knows the time for talking is running out. "I had a son," Samuel said one evening, not looking up from his coffee. "He went east 15 years ago, said ranching was no life." A pause. "He was right, probably. I never told him that." Ethan said nothing. "You got family?" Samuel asked. "No, sir." "Woman?" Ethan was quiet. Samuel looked at him with those sharp old eyes. "Ah," he said. "Like that." "It's not like anything," Ethan said. "It's done. A thing being done doesn't mean it's not like something," Samuel said dryly. He picked up his coffee. "What happened?" Ethan told him. Not all of it, not the fence repairs and the barn conversations, and the particular way she said his name when she finally used it, but the shape of it, the basic structure, the arithmetic of why he had left. Samuel listened without interrupting, which was a skill most people did not have. When Ethan finished, the old man was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That was either noble or stupid. I can't tell which yet." "Maybe both," Ethan said. "Probably both." Samuel agreed. "Did she ask you to leave?" "No." "Did she ask you to stay?" A longer pause. "No." "Then you made a decision for 2 people using only one person's information," Samuel said. He set down his coffee. That's not noble. That's just afraid. Ethan looked at him. I'm an old man, Samuel said unapologetically. I don't have time to say things sideways. He pushed back from the table. There's fence to mend in the morning. You know where the tools are. He went to bed. Ethan sat at the kitchen table for a long time after, with the lamp burning low, and thought about the difference between noble and afraid. He did not like what he found when he looked at it honestly. The winter that came to that high valley was the worst in 30 years. It arrived early and hit hard the way the worst winters always do. A deceptive warm week in November that made men lower their guard, and then a storm that rolled in off the mountains and didn't stop for 9 days. Temperature dropped to things that cracked wood and froze water in pipes and killed cattle where they stood if they weren't sheltered in time. Ethan and Samuel worked against it from the first hour. They got the horses in. They got most of the cattle into the lower pasture, where the natural windbreak of a rock ridge gave some protection. They ran feed lines in conditions that turned a man's face to numbness in 10 minutes, and made every trip from the barn to the pasture a negotiation with the weather. On the 4th day of the storm, they lost count of the cattle in the lower pasture, and Ethan realized, doing the math in his head against what Samuel had told him about the herd, that a section of 15 to 20 head was unaccounted for. They'd have gone up the draw, Samuel said. He was already exhausted, his face gray with cold and effort. There's a high pasture through the timber. They go up there in summer. If they tried to shelter in the timber... I'll go, Ethan said. You'll freeze. No, Ethan said. I won't. He said it with the particular quiet certainty of a man who has made a decision and finished with uncertainty about it. He got his heaviest gear. He took his rope, his rifle, and Cinder, who trusted him even in the dark and the cold, in a way that most horses would not. He went up the draw in whiteout conditions, following Cinder's instincts more than his own, because his own were blinded by the snow. It took 3 hours to find the cattle, 19 head, huddled in a pocket of timber that had protected them from the worst of the wind, but not from the cold, and 2 of them down and needing to be gotten up before they stayed down permanently. He got them up. He drove the herd back down the draw in the dark, and the storm with nothing but his voice and his rope and Cinder's steady nerve, and when he rode into the lower pasture and counted 19 head into shelter, his hands were so cold he could not feel them, and his face had gone past numb into something that frightened him briefly. Samuel Reed was waiting at the barn door. He took Cinder's reins without a word. He brought Ethan inside. He made him sit beside the stove and brought hot coffee, and did not speak for 10 minutes, while Ethan's hands came back to him with the particular agony of returning circulation. Finally, Samuel said, "How many?" 19, Ethan said. 2 were down. They're up now. Samuel was quiet. I'll check them again in an hour, Ethan said. You will not, Samuel said. You'll sleep. I'll check them. Ethan looked at him. Your hands. My hands can open a barn door, Samuel said sharply. Then more quietly, you could have died up there. I reckoned I wouldn't. That's not the same thing as knowing. No, Ethan admitted. It isn't. Samuel looked at him for a long moment. His old eyes were doing that measuring thing again, the same calculation, the same weighing. Then he said, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to hear it clearly. Ethan waited. I've had men work for me for 50 years, Samuel said. Good men and bad men and men somewhere in between. I have not had a man ride into a whiteout for 19 cattle that weren't even his. He paused. You did that because it was the right thing. Not because I asked you, not because I was watching, because you decided the cattle mattered, and that was enough. Ethan said nothing. That's a particular kind of person, Samuel said. I've met very few of them. He stood up and moved toward the barn door to check the herd. At the door, without turning around, he said, The woman who let you leave is a fool. He went out into the cold. Ethan sat by the stove and drank his coffee, and did not argue with him because arguing with a man about something you secretly believe is true has always been a waste of everyone's time. The storm broke on the 9th day. in the silence after the particular profound silence of a world covered in new snow. With the wind finally gone, Ethan walked the property and assessed the damage. 2 fence lines down, 1 section of barn roof that had taken too much weight, equipment to be dug out and checked. All of it manageable, all of it work he knew how to do. Samuel walked beside him slower than usual, leaning on a stick he had not needed before the storm. "I'm going to make you a proposition," Samuel said when they had finished the survey. Ethan looked at him. "I'm going to be honest with you about what I can and can't do." Samuel continued. "I can't run this ranch. I haven't been able to run this ranch for 2 years. I've been keeping it alive out of stubbornness, which is not the same thing as running it." He stopped walking. "You can run this ranch." "Mr. Reed." "Hear me out." Samuel's voice was firm. "I have no children who want this land. My son is not coming back. The bank will take it when I die if I don't make another arrangement. I don't want the bank to take it." He looked at Ethan with those clear old eyes. "I want to make you a legal arrangement. You work this ranch properly as its manager, and when I'm gone, the land comes to you. All of it." The silence after that was very complete. Ethan stood in the snow-covered yard of a stranger's ranch and felt the ground shift under him in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. "You don't know me," he said finally. "Not well enough for that. I know what you did in that storm," Samuel said. "I know what you did to the stock tank the first day you came here without being asked. I know how you talk to my horses and how you maintain equipment and how you treat a piece of land that isn't yours." He paused. "A man shows you who he is if you watch him work long enough. I've watched you work for 4 months. I'm not guessing." Ethan looked at the mountains. He thought about Abigail saying you were always worthy in a version of the future he had never let himself imagine. "I'll need to think about it," he said. "Think fast," Samuel said dryly. "I'm 74. "Rosso," he said yes 3 days later. Not because the land solved anything he thought needed solving. Not because he had been waiting for an opportunity or because he had any particular plan for what came next. He said yes because Samuel Reed had looked at him and seen something worth keeping. And because a man who has spent a long time believing he is not worth much develops a complicated relationship with people who disagree with that assessment. He signed the paperwork in the spring in a lawyer's office in Bridger with Samuel Reed beside him, and the mountain light coming through a dusty window. The lawyer read the terms aloud with the bored efficiency of a man who processes other people's significant moments all day. Ethan listened to every word. When the last signature was done, Samuel shook his hand. "Don't waste it," the old man said. "I won't," Ethan said. He meant it the way he meant most things completely, without reservation, with the full weight of himself behind the words. Spring came, and with it, the work of rebuilding. Ethan drove it with the same focused intensity he brought to everything. But something was different now. The work was his. The decisions were his. The results, good and bad, were his to own and learn from and carry forward. He repaired the fence lines Samuel hadn't been able to manage for 2 seasons. He rebuilt the barn section that had collapsed under the winter's weight. He improved the stock tank system and rerouted 2 drainage problems that had been losing water from the upper pasture every wet season. He bought 20 head of cattle, good cattle chosen carefully, and added them to the herd that had survived the winter and managed the combined herd with a precision that Samuel, watching from the porch with his morning coffee, observed without comment and with visible satisfaction. He hired one hand in May, a young man named Will, who worked hard and asked good questions and reminded Ethan uncomfortably of himself 10 years younger. He was fair with the boy's wages and generous with what he knew, because he had worked for men who hoarded knowledge like it was a limited resource and had watched that hoarding make operations worse, and he had no patience for it. Samuel died in June, quietly in his sleep on a warm night when the summer was just beginning and the high pasture was green and the cattle were fat. The doctor said his heart had simply decided it was done, which seemed to Ethan like an accurate description of what he had watched happening slowly all year. He buried Samuel on the property on a rise overlooking the valley under a pine tree the old man had told him he liked for the way it caught the morning light. He did it right. He got the preacher from Bridger, and he told the small group of people who came neighbors, the lawyer, a few men from town, who had known Samuel something true about the man. He said Samuel Reed had been the kind of person who paid attention to what a man actually was, instead of what he appeared to be, and that this was rarer than it had any right to be, and that he had been lucky to know him. He meant every word. He stood at the grave after everyone else had left and was quiet for a while. "I'll not waste it," he said. Then he went back to work. What nobody tells you about getting what you wanted is that it doesn't answer the question underneath the wanting. He had land now. 300 acres of high pasture and timber, a house, a barn, a herd that was building itself back up to something respectable. He had a name in the valley around Bridger. Not a big name, not a famous name, but the reliable kind. The kind that meant people brought him problems and trusted his answers. He was building something. He could see it clearly, where it had been, where it was going. And he still woke up at 3 a.m. some nights thinking about a woman standing in a barn with grease on her cheek, asking him the wrong question. He worked harder on those mornings. He was working hard on a morning in late July when Will came to find him at the fence line with the particular expression of a man carrying news he's not sure how to deliver. "Letter came," Will said. He held it out. Ethan looked at it. The handwriting on the envelope was not familiar. It was a man's hand, careful and formal, from a law office in Harlan Creek, Montana. His hands, which had not shaken since the morning he burned his own letter, went very still. He took the envelope. He opened it with his folding knife. He read it standing at the fence line with the summer sun on his back, and Will watching him with poorly concealed curiosity. The letter was from a lawyer named Prescott in Harlan Creek. It informed him in the formal language lawyers use when they are delivering information they know is complicated that Thomas Carter had passed away in the spring following a second cardiac episode. That the Carter Ranch was now the legal property of Abigail Carter, who had declined the arranged marriage to Douglas Whitmore following her father's death. That Abigail Carter was currently managing the ranch's operation independently, and that there were, according to the legal communication, certain financial matters related to a freight contract dispute with a man named Gould that were creating difficulties. The letter then said something that stopped him entirely. It said that Abigail Carter had provided his name to the lawyer as a character reference in the freight dispute proceedings, and that if he was willing to provide a written statement of his knowledge of the Gould situation, it would assist her case considerably. That was all. A character reference, nothing personal, nothing beyond the legal requirement. His name on a piece of paper saying he had witnessed Gould's conduct toward the Carter operation and could confirm the pattern. He folded the letter. He looked at the mountains. "Bad news?" Will asked. "No," Ethan said slowly. "Not bad." He folded the letter again, smaller, and put it in his pocket. "Good. I think it's good." He went back to the fence. He worked for another hour. He was very precise about the work. Each post set exactly right. Each wire pulled exactly tight because the work was what he had, and the work would tell him what to do next, if he did it honestly enough. At noon he went to the house and sat at the table Samuel Reed had sat at all those years and wrote a letter to a lawyer in Harlan Creek, Montana. He wrote it once. He did not burn it. He sealed it and addressed it and set it on the corner of the table to go out with Will the next morning. Then he sat back and thought about Thomas Carter, whom he had respected being gone. He thought about Abigail alone with the ranch and the debt, and Gould still circling. He thought about a woman who had always been capable of running that operation without ever being allowed to prove it, finally proving it alone the hard way. He thought she was probably fine. He thought she was probably not fine. He thought about the difference between those two things for a long time. He thought about what Samuel Reed had said about making decisions for two people using only one person's information. He thought about Noble and Afraid. He thought 18 months is long enough to become someone different, long enough to know the difference. He sat at the table until the light changed, and the summer evening came on warm and quiet, with the cattle moving in the upper pasture and Cinder in the barn below, and everything he had built around him. Then he got up, walked to the barn, and stood looking at Cinder for a long time. The mare looked back at him with that particular patience. She always had the patience of an animal that had traveled everywhere he had traveled and trusted him anyway. "I need to think about this," he told her. She moved her ears, went back to her hay. He laughed very quietly for the first time in a long time. "Yeah," he said. "You're right. I've been thinking about it for 18 months. That's probably enough." He did not make any decisions that evening. But the next morning, when Will came to start the day, Ethan gave him a list of tasks that would carry the ranch through 2 weeks without close supervision. Will looked at the list, looked at Ethan. "You going somewhere?" "Maybe," Ethan said. "How long?" "I don't know yet." He looked at the boy. "Can you handle it?" Will straightened slightly with the particular dignity of a young man being trusted with something real for the first time. "Yes, sir." "Good." Ethan clapped him once on the shoulder and went to saddle Cinder. He did not have a plan. He had a direction. That had always been enough to start. He rode into Harlan Creek on a Wednesday afternoon, and the town looked exactly the same. That was the first thing that struck him. Not the familiarity of the buildings, or the smell of the feed store, or the sound of the livery down the main road. It was the sameness. He had changed so thoroughly in 18 months that some part of him had expected the world to have changed with him. It hadn't. Harlan Creek sat in its valley exactly as he had left it, dusty and practical and indifferent to whatever a man had been through since the last time he passed through. He tied Cinder at the rail outside the lawyer's office and went in. Prescott was a thin man of 50 with spectacles and the cautious manner of someone who had learned that information delivered too quickly caused problems. He looked up when Ethan came through the door and recognized him, which meant Abigail had described him accurately enough. "Mr. Walker," Prescott said. He did not stand. He gestured to the chair across the desk. "I didn't expect you in person." "The letter seemed like something that needed a conversation," Ethan said. He sat. "Tell me about Gould." Prescott looked at him for a moment, with that cautious expression calculating something. Then he decided apparently that plain dealing was the right approach. "Gerald Gould has been pursuing a freight contract claim against the Carter Ranch for 14 months. He alleges that Thomas Carter entered into a verbal agreement in the spring of 1883 that committed the Carter operation to exclusive use of Gould's freight service at rates Gould set unilaterally. There is no written contract. Thomas Carter denied the agreement's terms before his death. Miss Carter has denied it since. There was no agreement," Ethan said flatly. "I was present for one of Gould's attempts to pressure Thomas Carter in the spring of '84. He was not presenting an agreement. He was trying to create one. That's exactly what Miss Carter has maintained." Prescott picked up a pen and set it down again. "The difficulty is that Gould has engaged a lawyer from the capital, a Mr. Harwell. He's skilled, and he is arguing that Miss Carter, as a woman without a male business partner, lacks the legal standing to contest the claim independently. He's using the estate transition as his opening." Ethan looked at him. "That's not a legal argument. That's a strategy." "It's both," Prescott said. "And it's working to a degree. The territorial judge has granted Gould a preliminary hearing in 6 weeks. If Miss Carter cannot produce evidence of the agreement's falseness, which is difficult to prove a negative, or cannot demonstrate the operational credibility of the Carter Ranch as an independent concern, the court may find in Gould's favor." "What does she need?" Prescott looked at him over his spectacles. "Evidence, witnesses, and frankly, someone in that courtroom who carries enough personal credibility to offset the impression Harwell is trying to create that the Carter Ranch is a failing operation being managed by a woman who doesn't know what she's doing." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "She knows what she's doing." "I believe you," Prescott said. "The judge will need convincing." He stood, which apparently was how Prescott ended conversations. "I'd suggest you speak with Miss Carter before you make any commitments. The situation is complicated." Ethan rose. "How so?" Prescott looked at him with an expression that was almost sympathetic. "She knows you're here. I sent word when I received your letter saying you were coming. A pause. She asked me to tell you, if I saw you first, that she does not require your personal involvement, that a written statement would be sufficient. The room was quiet. She said that? Ethan asked. Precisely that, Prescott confirmed. Her words. Ethan picked up his hat. Where is she? The ranch, Prescott said, where she's been every day since her father died. He walked out. Toned. The road to Carter Ranch was 6 miles of packed dirt that Ethan had ridden enough times in the previous summer that his body knew its rhythms before his mind had fully registered he was on it. Cinder moved with the easy confidence of a horse returning to familiar ground. The summer heat was the same that specific Montana afternoon weight that pressed down on everything and made the distant mountains shimmer at their edges. He did not rehearse what he would say. He had learned somewhere in the last 18 months that rehearsing things you intended to say to Abigail Carter was a waste of time because she never responded to the version of the conversation he prepared for. She responded to what was actually happening, which was usually something different. He came into the yard, and nobody came out of the house. He unsaddled Cinder and put her in the barn, the same stall she had used the summer before, the one Abigail had shown him the first day, and walked across the yard toward the house. The door opened before he reached it. Abigail Carter stood in the doorway. She was thinner than he remembered. Not fragile, she had never been fragile, and she was not now, but the weight of a difficult year was visible in the set of her shoulders and the lines around her eyes that had deepened since the previous summer. Her hair was pulled back the way she always wore it for work. She was wearing her work clothes. She had been doing something practical when he rode in, and she had stopped to come to the door. They looked at each other across the yard. I told Mr. Prescott a written statement would be sufficient, she said. He told me, Ethan said. I meant it. I know you did. She crossed her arms. Then why are you here? He stopped walking when he was close enough to speak without raising his voice and far enough away to give her room. Because a written statement would be sufficient for the legal matter, he said. And I have more than one reason for being here. Something moved in her face. She controlled it immediately, the way she controlled most things decisively, without drama. My father is gone, she said. Since April. The ranch is mine now. I know. I'm sorry about Thomas. He liked you, she said. It came out more direct than she intended, and she knew it. He watched her know it. He said once that you were the best worker he'd ever hired, and the most frustrating man he'd ever tried to understand. He said those two things in the same sentence. Ethan looked at her. That sounds like him. It does. Her jaw was set. You left without saying goodbye. Yes. Without a word. Without a letter. Without... She stopped, pressed her lips together, looked past him toward the barn for a moment, and then back. I'm not angry. You sound angry. I'm not, she said firmly. I am... A pause. I spent a long time trying to figure out why you left the way you did, what it meant, whether it was something I had done or something you had decided, whether... She stopped again. I'm not going to do this in the yard. She turned and went back into the house. He followed. The kitchen was the same. The table where she worked on her account books was the same, covered now with papers that were clearly legal documents. The freight dispute, the estate paperwork, the accumulated weight of a ranch's business laid out in Prescott's careful handwriting. The lamp was the same. The two chairs at the table were the same. She stood on the far side of the table with her arms still crossed and looked at him. Sit down, she said. Or stand, I don't care. He sat. She didn't. Whitmore, he said. The engagement. I ended it, she said. In November, before my father's first episode. She said it plainly, no apology in it. I should have ended it earlier. I knew the night of the dinner that I was going to end it. I just needed time to do it in the right way. Ethan looked at her. Your father was disappointed, she said. And then he understood. And then he stopped asking me about it, which is the closest Thomas Carter ever came to an apology. Something softened briefly in her expression. He was a good man. He just had very fixed ideas about what was good for me. He wanted the ranch to be safe, Ethan said. Yes, so did I. The difference was that I knew I was the one who could make it safe. He needed longer to see that. She finally sat, not relaxing, but organizing herself into the chair the way she organized everything. I've been running this operation since October, not alongside him, running it. The accounts, the contracts, the labor management, the cattle decisions. All of it. I've kept it solvent, and I've increased the herd by 12%. And I have 3 new trade relationships in the valley that my father never pursued because he didn't believe in trading with smaller operators. She looked at him with those gray-green eyes that gave nothing away and gave everything away simultaneously. I know what I'm doing, Ethan. I know you do, he said. I've always known that. Then why? The word came out sharp and she caught it, breathed. Why did you leave like that? Without... Because I was afraid, he said. The word landed in the kitchen and sat there between them, plain and permanent. She stared at him. I thought I was being noble, he continued. I told myself I was making the right decision for you, that staying would complicate your life, that you deserved Whitmore's money and his name and his 3,000 acres, and that I had no right to want something different for you just because... He stopped, started again. An old man told me later that I had made a decision for 2 people using only one person's information. He was right. Abigail was very still. You never asked me what I wanted, she said quietly. No, he said. I didn't. You decided for me. Yes. The silence between them was different from the silences they had shared the previous summer. Those had been comfortable 2 people at ease with each other's company. This one had weight to it, the weight of a year of separate, difficult living, pressing against both sides of the same wall. I looked for a letter, she said, after you left, for weeks. I kept thinking you would have left something, some kind of explanation, anything. I wrote 3, Ethan said. Burned all of them. Her eyes changed. Why? Because everything I wrote was true, and I didn't know what truth would help you, and what truth would just be one more thing you had to carry. He looked at her directly. I was trying to protect you from me, which was arrogant. You were never someone who needed protecting from the truth. She looked down at the table for a long moment, at the legal papers spread across it, at her own hands. Gould is trying to take the freight contract, she said, her voice shifting, going practical, going back to the surface of things. Harwell is his lawyer, and he's good. He's arguing that I can't manage the business interests of the estate independently. Prescott told me, I don't need you to rescue me, she said. And then immediately, I need a credible witness who saw Gould's pattern of conduct firsthand. Who can speak to what the Carter operation was and what it is now? That is a legal requirement, not a personal one. Abigail, he said. She looked at him. I know the difference between what you need and what you'll ask for, he said. I know which one you'll ask for every time. I also know that the second one doesn't have to be the only thing on the table. Her jaw tightened. Don't. I'm not going to decide anything for you again, he said. I'm going to tell you plainly what I came here to say, and then you can do whatever you want with it. She was very still. I have land now, he said. 300 acres north of Bridger. I earned it. The operation is solvent and it's growing. I'm not wealthy, but I'm not what I was when I worked here, a man with a horse and 2 saddlebags and nothing to his name. He kept his eyes on her. That's not why I came back. I want to be clear about that. I didn't come back because I have land now. I came back because I was wrong to leave the way I did, and because I have thought about you every day for 18 months, and because I am tired of being afraid of the wrong things. The kitchen was absolutely silent. You don't have to say anything right now, he said. You don't have to say anything at all. Let me help with Gould. Let me be your witness. And when that's done, whatever you decide, After that is yours to decide." She looked at him for a long time. "You said every day," she said. "Yes." "Every day for 18 months?" "Yes." Something in her face broke open slightly. Not dramatically. Not with tears. Just a fracture in the careful composure barely visible there, and then controlled again. "I thought you'd forgotten us entirely." "I told you once," he said quietly, "that one day you'd forget me." "And I told you," she said, and her voice was rough in a way she did not try to hide. "That was the one thing I couldn't do." He had forgotten that conversation. He had not. He remembered it exactly. He had replayed it enough times in his head during 18 months of mountain work and winter storms and late nights at Samuel Reed's kitchen table that it had worn grooves in him. "I remember," he said. She pushed back from the table and stood and walked to the window and stood with her back to him for a moment, and he let her have that. When she turned around, her face was composed again. Her eyes were bright, but her voice was level. "There is a meeting tomorrow morning with Prescott and Harwell's associate who's come up from the Capitol to take statements. I need you there for that, in a professional capacity." "I'll be there," he said. "You can stay in the bunkhouse tonight. Burl's still here. He'll show you where things are." "All right." She looked at him for one more moment. "Ethan?" "Yeah." "I'm glad you came back," she said. And then she turned back to her papers, as if she had not said anything at all, as if those 5 words had not cost her something significant to say plainly, and he stood and picked up his hat and went to find Burl. Burl was in the barn and greeted him with the same blunt warmth he'd always had, which was to say he shook his hand firmly and said, "Figured you'd show up eventually," and went back to what he was doing. He showed Ethan the bunkhouse still not leaking, and told him that Pete had moved on the previous fall, and that Crow was still there, and still the best horseman in the county, and that the ranch had taken on 2 new hands over the winter young men named Roy and Dix, who worked well enough. "She's been running it hard," Burl said. He was not looking at Ethan when he said it. He was checking a bridle for wear. "Since Thomas died. Hard and smart. I told her once I thought she was doing better than Thomas in his prime, and she told me not to say that to anyone else because it wasn't the right time for that particular compliment." He paused. "She was right. It wasn't." "Gould," Ethan said. "Gould and Harwell and the territorial court and 6 weeks of her not sleeping right." Burl set the bridle down. "She needs this legal business settled. After that," he looked at Ethan with that flat foreman's assessment. "After that, she needs to stop running this ranch like she's got something to prove and start running it like it's already hers, which it is." "She knows that," Ethan said. "She does," Burl agreed. "She'll feel it when the court says so out loud." He picked up the bridle again. "Glad you're here, Walker. For whatever reason you're here." Ethan looked at him. "Multiple reasons," he said. Burl almost smiled. "Figured," he said, and went back to work. The meeting with Harwell's associate, a young man named Croft, who wore his city clothes like armor and took notes with the aggressive efficiency of someone trying to appear more dangerous than he was, happened in Prescott's office the next morning. Croft questioned Ethan for 40 minutes. He was looking for inconsistency. He was looking for anything that would allow him to characterize Ethan as a disgruntled former employee with a grievance against the Carter operation, or alternatively as a current associate of Abigail's with a personal stake in the outcome. He tried both angles with the persistence of a man who had been trained to be thorough. Ethan answered every question with the same quiet directness he brought to everything, and gave Croft nothing to work with. He was not a disgruntled former employee. He had left on his own terms, following a completed season. He had no current financial relationship with the Carter Ranch. He had been present in the freight office in the spring of 1884 and had witnessed Gerald Gould's conduct toward Abigail Carter on that occasion, and he was prepared to describe that conduct in exact detail. He described it. Croft wrote down every word. Halfway through the meeting, something shifted. Croft's aggressive efficiency became more careful. His questions became more precise. He had come in looking for a weak witness, and he had found the opposite, and he was smart enough to recognize it and adjust his approach accordingly. When it was over, Croft gathered his notes, nodded briefly, and left. Prescott looked at Ethan across the desk. "That was effective," he said with something approaching warmth. "Very effective." Abigail, who had been sitting beside Ethan for the entire meeting with her back straight and her hands folded on the table, was quiet for a moment after Croft left. Then she let out a breath slow and controlled the breath of someone releasing pressure they had been managing for a long time. "He'll report back to Harwell tonight," she said, "and Harwell will reassess." "He will," Prescott confirmed. "What Mr. Walker described constitutes a clear pattern of coercive conduct. Combined with the operational records you've provided and the statements from your other trade partners, the case against Gould's claim is considerably stronger than it was yesterday." Abigail looked at Ethan. He met her gaze. "Thank you," she said, formally carefully, the way she said things that mattered. "There's more," Ethan said. She went still. "Something I didn't mention to Croft," he said, because he didn't ask the right question. Prescott looked between them. "Gould didn't approach me in the summer of '84 about the Carter freight contract," Ethan said. "He approached me about you." The silence in the room changed quality. "Explain that," Abigail said. Her voice was very level. "August of '84, 3 weeks before I left. He came out to the north pasture when I was working alone. I thought it was an accident, a man off his road asking directions." Ethan looked at her steadily. "It wasn't. He knew who I was. He knew my position at the ranch. He said he had heard I was a capable man, and that capable men deserved to work for capable employers. And then he said that he had concerns about the Carter operation's long-term viability. Given his words, the daughter's influence on management decisions." Abigail's expression did not change. "He was asking you to report on me. He was feeling out whether I'd be willing to. He didn't make it explicit. He made it sound like professional courtesy." Ethan kept his eyes on her. "I told him I wasn't interested and walked away. I didn't think it was significant enough to mention to Thomas at the time because Gould didn't actually ask me to do anything specific. But the fact that he knew who I was and knew enough about the internal management of the Carter Ranch to know that you were making decisions. He had someone else inside," Abigail said. "Or he had watched the operation closely enough to know," Ethan said. "One or the other." Prescott had picked up his pen and was writing rapidly. "This is significant," he said. "Significant. It establishes that Gould had knowledge of the Carter operation's internal management structure prior to Thomas Carter's death, which undermines his claim that the freight dispute only became relevant after the estate transition. If he knew about Miss Carter's role in 1884, then he was building toward this in 1884, Abigail said. Her voice had gone very quiet. He was preparing the ground. She looked at Ethan. "You should have told me." "Yes," he said simply. "I should have." She looked at him for a moment, with an expression he could not fully read, something between anger and the complicated relief of a person who receives important information 2 years late and is grateful for it and furious about the timing simultaneously. "All right," she said. She turned to Prescott. "What does this change?" Everything, Prescott said, and for the first time in 2 days, he sounded genuinely pleased. What followed was not a single dramatic confrontation, but the slow, grinding work of a legal case being turned in a new direction, which was less satisfying in the moment and more effective in practice. Prescott spent 3 days drafting a revised response to Gould's claim. He pulled records from the freight office about Gould's conduct with other small operators in the valley, a pattern that once you looked for it became clear very quickly. He contacted 2 of those operators, men who had settled rather than fight, and one of them agreed to provide a supporting statement. Abigail ran the ranch during all of it. She did it without pausing the legal fight, which meant she was managing both simultaneously, which meant she was operating on about 5 hours of sleep a night and drinking more coffee than was good for anyone. Ethan watched her do it with the particular combination of admiration and frustration, that she had always produced in him, the sense of someone operating at full capacity out of sheer determination, and the equally strong sense that she didn't have to do it entirely alone and was refusing help out of a stubbornness that was equal parts pride and self-protection. He helped anyway, not with the legal work that was Prescott's territory and Abigail's, but with the ranch. He took the morning rounds with Burl. He managed a cattle situation in the east pasture that needed 2 experienced hands to resolve correctly. He repaired the pump on the north water line that had been giving trouble for a week because nobody had time to look at it. He did these things without asking permission or making announcements, and Abigail did not acknowledge them directly, which he understood to mean that she was aware and did not object. On the 4th evening, she found him at the water pump, which he had just finished with wiping down his hands. "You don't have to do this," she said. "The pump was broken," he said. "It's not now." She looked at the pump, then at him with that expression that meant she was choosing between several things she could say and selecting carefully. "You've been here 4 days," she said. "The legal meeting is done. You could go back to your ranch." "I could," he said. "Burl can handle the morning rounds." "Burl can handle anything," Ethan agreed. "That's not why I'm still here." She looked at him for a long moment in the evening light, and something in the careful composure she always maintained shifted slightly like a fence post that has been pulled at by something it wasn't built to resist. "Ethan," she said, "I need to ask you something and I need a straight answer." "Yes. Did you come back because of the legal matter or because of—" She stopped, started again. "Are you here because you felt obligated or because you wanted to be here?" He put the wrench down. He looked at her directly. "I'm here because I wanted to be here. The legal matter gave me a reason to come. Wanting to be here is why I got on my horse." She held his gaze. "And if the legal matter resolves tomorrow, if Gould drops the claim, if there is no more reason to stay, then I need a different reason," he said. "And I would like to discuss what that might be, with you, directly." He paused. "When you're ready." The silence between them was the complicated kind, again full of everything they had not yet said, and all the things they had said that were still settling into their permanent shapes. "The hearing is in 2 weeks," she said finally. "Let's get through the hearing." "All right," he said. She nodded once, turned to go, then stopped. "Ethan." "Yeah." She looked back at him over her shoulder. "I'm glad you got on your horse." She walked away. He stood in the summer evening with the repaired pump at his feet and the mountains going orange in the distance, and felt something shift in his chest that had been locked in place for 18 months. Not fully open, not resolved, but moving, finally moving in the right direction. He picked up his tools and walked back to the barn, and the summer evening was warm around him, and Cinder nickered when he came through the door, and he stood with his hand on the mare's neck for a moment, just breathing. 2 weeks. He could wait 2 weeks. He had waited 18 months. 2 weeks was nothing. 2 weeks was easy. He told himself that, and almost believed it, which was progress. The 2 weeks did not pass quietly. Ethan had expected them to, had told himself that the waiting would be the straightforward part, that the hard work was already done in Prescott's office, and the rest was just time moving forward, the way time always did. He was wrong about that. The 2 weeks were the hardest part of everything, because they were full of the particular tension of 2 people living in close proximity to an unfinished conversation. Both of them knowing it was unfinished, neither of them willing to rush it. He worked the ranch. She worked the ranch and the legal case simultaneously. They ate supper most evenings at the same table in the kitchen with Burl and sometimes Crow, and the conversation was practical and easy, and covered everything except the thing that mattered most, which was the specific gravity of the air between them whenever they were in the same room. Burl noticed. Crow noticed. Roy and Dix were too new to the operation to know what they were noticing, but they noticed something. Nobody said anything. Ranch people understood that some things moved at their own pace, and interference didn't help. On the 8th day, something changed. Ethan was in the barn with Cinder when he heard voices in the yard. Abigail's voice, and a man's voice he did not recognize carrying the particular edge of a conversation that had started wrong and was getting worse. He came to the barn door without hurrying and looked out. A man on a good horse was in the yard, well-dressed, 40 years old or close to it, with the broad-shouldered build of someone who had once worked physically and no longer needed to. He was looking down at Abigail from the saddle with an expression that was civil on the surface and something harder underneath. Douglas Whitmore. Ethan had never seen the man up close. He had watched him from across a yard 18 months ago and made assumptions based on posture and clothing and the way Thomas Carter shook his hand. Up close, his assessment did not change much. Whitmore was not a villain. He was something more complicated. A man who had wanted something, been denied it, and had not yet fully decided how to feel about that. "I heard there was a legal matter," Whitmore was saying. "I wanted to offer assistance, that's all." "That's generous," Abigail said. Her tone was the particular brand of polite she used when she wanted to end a conversation efficiently. "I have representation. Prescott's good for routine matters. Gould's hired Harwell." Whitmore looked down at her steadily. "Harwell is not a routine matter, Abigail." "I'm aware of what Harwell is," she said. "My family has a relationship with 2 territorial judges," Whitmore said. "Not to influence proceedings, I'm not suggesting that. But there are legitimate ways a respected name can provide context for—" "No," she said. The word was clean and final. Not angry. Just done. Whitmore was quiet for a moment. He looked at the ranch around him, at the yard, the barn, the operation, with the expression of a man doing an involuntary accounting. "You've done well here," he said. "Better than most people expected." "Better than you expected," she said. He absorbed that without flinching, which suggested he was either more self-aware than Ethan had credited or better at concealing the flinch. "Yes," he said. "Better than I expected. I was wrong about what you were capable of. I'd like the chance to say that directly." Something in Abigail's posture shifted slightly, not softening but reorganizing. "You just did," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Is there someone—" He stopped, glanced at the barn. He had not looked directly at Ethan standing in the doorway, but men with money developed a particular sensitivity to being watched, and he knew someone was there. "Is there a reason you won't accept help from someone who's offering it without conditions?" "There are conditions in every offer," Abigail said, "whether they're stated up front or not." Whitmore looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his face, the performance of civility dropping slightly to show something genuine underneath which Ethan respected more than the performance. "I should have listened better," Whitmore said. "When we were before. I heard what you said, but I was listening for what I expected to hear. That was my failure, not yours." Abigail was quiet. "I hope the hearing goes well," Whitmore said. He picked up his reins. He looked once directly at Ethan in the barn doorway. A long look, the kind 2 men exchange when they both understand what they're communicating without needing to say it. Then he looked back at Abigail. "If you change your mind about assistance, the offer stands. No conditions." He turned his horse and rode out. Abigail stood in the yard until the sound of his horse faded. Then she turned and looked at Ethan. "How long were you standing there?" she asked. "Long enough," he said. She walked toward the barn and past him into the dim interior and stood there for a moment, her back to him, her hands at her sides. He stayed in the doorway and let her have the space. "He's not a bad man," she said. "I know. I just never—" She stopped. He looked at this ranch and saw a problem to be solved, a thing to be managed. He looked at me and saw— She turned around. I think he looked at me and saw a solution to a different problem, his problem, the right family to merge with, the right operation to fold into his own. She looked at Ethan directly. "He never once asked me what I wanted." Ethan held her gaze. "I know the feeling," he said carefully. She blinked. Then something broke open in her expression. Not tears, but the acknowledgement of something that hurt. "Yes," she said. "I suppose you do." A pause. "I did the same thing to you, didn't I?" I decided what was practical, and I moved toward it, and I didn't ask you what you wanted either." "You didn't have information I should have given you," he said. "That's different." "Is it—" The barn was quiet around them. Cinder shifted in her stall. "Abigail," he said. "I know," she said. "The hearing first." "I know." She squared her shoulders, that gesture he knew so well, the deliberate reassembly of composure. "But after the hearing," he said, "I'd like to ask you some questions. And I'd like to hear your answers, the real ones." She looked at him for a long moment. "All right," she said. After the hearing, she walked back out of the barn into the summer light, and he watched her go, and the remaining 6 days felt like the longest of his life. The hearing was in Harlan Creek's territorial courtroom, a room that smelled of old wood and authority, and the accumulated weight of decisions that had mattered to the people involved in them. Judge Caldwell was 60 and unhurried, and had the particular quality of a man who had heard every kind of argument and was no longer impressed by presentation. He cared about evidence. Prescott had spent 2 weeks preparing evidence. Gould sat at one table with Harwell, who was everything his reputation suggested, composed, precise, and skilled at making complicated things sound simple, and simple things sound insurmountable. Abigail sat at the other table with Prescott, her back straight, and her hands folded, and her face carrying that particular expression that meant she was managing something enormous and making it look like nothing. Ethan sat in the gallery. Harwell opened with the expected argument: the estate transition, the question of independent management capacity, the unresolved freight agreement. He was good. He made Gould's claim sound reasonable and almost compassionate, as if Gerald Gould were simply trying to have a legitimate business agreement honored, and had been unfortunately denied by an operation that lacked the stability to meet its obligations. Prescott dismantled it methodically. He presented the operational records first: 14 months of accounts, cattle records, trade agreements, all of them showing an operation that was not declining but growing. He presented the statements from Gould's other targets in the valley, the pattern of conduct that the freight dispute fit into precisely. He presented Ethan's account of the approach in the North Pasture in the summer of 1884, which established that Gould had been building toward this specific strategy for years before Thomas Carter died. Harwell objected to the 1884 account on relevance grounds. Judge Caldwell looked at him over his spectacles. "Overruled," he said with the tone of a man who had already seen where it was relevant. Then Prescott called Abigail to speak. She stood. She walked to the front of the room. She turned to face the judge with the same composure she brought to everything, and began to speak about the Carter Ranch, not as an inheritance, not as a burden, not as something she had been left to manage by circumstance. She spoke about it as something she understood. She knew the cattle numbers, the pasture rotation schedule, the trade relationships, the freight costs, and what they should be. She knew the history of the operation, and the current state of it, and where it was going. She spoke for 20 minutes with the focused precision of someone who had been running something real and knew every detail of it from the inside. Harwell cross-examined her for 15 minutes and got nothing useful. Ethan watched from the gallery and thought she has been ready for this her entire life. The only thing that took this long was getting the room to listen. Judge Caldwell deliberated for 40 minutes. When he came back, he looked at Gerald Gould and said in the plain language he apparently preferred for delivering verdicts that the evidence did not support the existence of the freight agreement, as Gould had described it, that the pattern of conduct established by the testimony was consistent with an attempt to create a legal obligation where none existed, and that the Carter Ranch's status as a solvent and capably managed operation was not in question. He dismissed the claim entirely. He also noted in language that Prescott later told Ethan was unusually direct for a territorial judge that Mr. Gould might want to consider whether his approach to business relationships in the valley was serving his long-term interests. It was as close to a public rebuke as the law typically offered. Gould's face when the verdict was read went through several things in rapid succession. Harwell put a hand on his arm and said something low, and Gould stood, and they walked out without looking at anyone. The room exhaled. Abigail stood at the table and did not move for a moment. Then Prescott said something to her, and she nodded and gathered the papers in front of her with the methodical care of someone who needed to do something with her hands. She looked up once and found Ethan in the gallery. He held her gaze. She nodded once, small definitive, the nod she used when something was finished and correctly finished. He tipped his hat to her. She looked away, and he thought he saw in the moment before she did the first genuinely unguarded expression he had seen on her face since he came back. Relief. Pure, complete, hard-earned relief. The celebration, such as it was, happened in the kitchen that evening. Burl produced a bottle of whiskey that he had apparently been saving for a significant occasion and poured 4 glasses himself. Crow Ethan and Abigail, and raised his without ceremony. "Carter Ranch," he said. "Carter Ranch," the others said. Abigail drank her glass and set it down and immediately looked like herself again, which meant the relief had been absorbed and filed, and she had already moved on to whatever came next. She looked at the papers she had spread on the table before the hearing that morning and had not touched since. "The Reed operation," she said. 300 acres, you said. Ethan looked at her. "That's right. High pasture. 200 acres of it. The rest is timber and a section of creek bottom. Cattle. 60 head and building. Good summer pasture, but the winters are hard in that valley." She was looking at him with the assessing expression he knew the rancher's look, not the personal one, or both at once, which was the thing about Abigail that had always been difficult to navigate. With her, the practical and the personal were not separate categories. They ran together. "You've been running it alone for how long?" 18 months, give or take. "One hired hand. Will. He's good. 20 years old and learning fast." She nodded, turning something over. "The Reed land and the Carter land are 2 days' ride apart. Day and a half," he said. "On the east route." Burl, who had been doing an excellent job of appearing to be interested in his whiskey glass, was doing a significantly worse job of hiding that he was listening to every word. Crow was cleaning his fingernails with his pocket knife and giving every indication of being somewhere else entirely. "I'm not selling the Carter Ranch," Abigail said. "I know," Ethan said. "I'm not selling the Reed land either. 2 separate operations," she said. 2 separate books. "Yes. That's complicated. Most things worth doing are." She looked at him. "You're getting ahead of the conversation." "I don't think I am," he said. "You asked me about acreage and cattle numbers and distance between properties. Those are not idle questions." "They might be," she said, but she almost smiled when she said it. "Abigail," he said. She met his eyes. "I told you I had questions I wanted to ask you," he said. "Real questions. Ones I should have asked before I made decisions you deserve to be part of." He kept his voice level and direct because that was how she received things best. "Can we talk just us?" Burl stood immediately. "Crow," he said, "I need your opinion on something in the barn." Crow looked up from his fingernails. "At this hour?" "Right now," Burl said. Crow looked at Ethan, at Abigail, at Burl. He closed his pocket knife. "Sure," he said, and they left, and the kitchen was quiet. Abigail set her hands flat on the table. It was a thing she did when she was organizing herself for a direct conversation, the physical version of clearing a workspace. He had noticed it the summer before. He still noticed it. "Ask," she said. "Do you want to stay here?" he said. "Not from obligation. Not because it's what your father built. Because you want to." She did not hesitate. "Yes. Do you want to keep running it the way you've been running it alone, making every decision yourself?" A pause that was a fraction longer. "I want to keep making decisions," she said. "I don't require being alone to do that." "Those are different things," he said. "I know they are," she said. "That's why I said it that way." He looked at her. "I left because I thought you were better off without me complicating your life. I was wrong, and I know I was wrong, and I am not going to make that mistake again, by deciding something for you that you should decide for yourself. He steadied himself. So I'm asking plainly, not as a man with a proposal in his pocket or a plan already drawn up, just asking, is there a version of the future you want that has me in it? The kitchen was very still. Abigail looked at him for a long time. The lamp was low and warm, and her face in it was clearer to him than anything he could name, not because she was showing him everything, but because he knew how to read what she didn't show. Yes, she said, quietly. No dramatics. Just the plain word, which was the only kind of word she ever really meant. There is, he breathed. But I need you to understand something first, she said, and her voice carried the particular weight of someone delivering terms, not ultimatums. I am not the same woman I was when you worked here. I have run this operation through a death and a legal fight, and a year of people waiting for me to fail. I know what I'm capable of now in a way I didn't before. And I will not. I cannot go back to being someone who defers to another person's judgment about what's best for her life. I don't want that, he said. I never wanted that. I know you didn't intend it, she said. But you did it. You decided to leave. You decided what was best. You didn't ask. She held his gaze. I need that to never happen again. It won't, he said. I can promise that and mean it. How? Because I've had 18 months to understand what I cost us both by doing it, he said. And because I am a different person than I was when I left. Not different in character, different in what I understand about what that character requires. He paused. I know who I am now in a way I didn't then, and I know that the man I am does not make unilateral decisions about the lives of people he loves. The word landed between them quiet as a stone in still water. Abigail's expression did not change dramatically, but something in her eyes did, something settled. You've never said that word, she said. Not once, not even... She stopped. I know, he said. I'm saying it now. She looked down at the table, at her hands. When she looked up again, her eyes were bright, but her voice was steady. I loved you last summer, she said. I want you to know that. I didn't say it then. I didn't let myself know it fully until after you were gone. But I did. I know, he said softly. You didn't know, she said. You guessed. That's different. All right, he said. I guessed. You were right, she said. You're frequently right about things you should just say out loud instead of guessing about. He almost smiled. I'm working on that. Work faster, she said. And this time she did smile, small, genuine, the smile she never directed at anyone when she thought she was being observed. He was quiet for a moment, just holding it. The room, the lamp, the smile. The conversation that had been 18 months in arriving. What I want, he said carefully, is to build something with you. Not to take over what you've built. Not to merge operations and make you the junior partner in your own ranch. But to build something that runs alongside what you have and what I have and is better than either one separately. He kept his eyes on her. Equal say, equal decisions, nobody disappearing without a conversation first. She looked at him steadily. That's going to require you to talk more than you're accustomed to. I'm aware, he said. And it's going to require me to ask for help when I need it, which I'm also not naturally inclined to do. I'm aware of that too. She looked at the lamp, then back at him. A courtship, she said. A real one. Not whatever we were doing last summer, which was something else. A proper courtship where we figure out if the practical details can actually work before we commit to anything. Agreed, he said. The Reed land stays yours, she said. The Carter ranch stays mine. Yes. But you're here for now, while we work this out. If that's what you want. She looked at him with an expression that was exasperated and warm and tired and very, very sure of itself simultaneously. Ethan Walker, she said. I spent 18 months not forgetting you. Yes, that is what I want. He let out a breath he had been holding, it seemed for a year and a half. La mode. The next morning, Ethan wrote a letter to Will at the Reed Ranch, explaining that he would be in Harlan Creek for the foreseeable future, and giving the boy the authority to manage the daily operation in his absence. He was direct about it, and practical cattle schedules the fence section that needed checking before fall, the account book procedure. He trusted Will with it. That trust he had found was itself a thing he'd had to earn the right to feel he'd had to become someone worth trusting before he could extend it well. He gave the letter to Roy to take to the post office in town and went to find Abigail. She was in the east pasture, checking a fence line. He fell in beside her without announcing himself, and they walked the line together the way they had walked it the summer before. Two people who knew the language of working land and could operate in comfortable parallel without needing to fill the silence with words. After 20 minutes, she said without looking at him, "Burl told me this morning that in 20 years of working ranches, he's never seen anyone read a fence line the way you do. He said, and I'm quoting, that man looks at wire like it owes him a personal explanation," which is a compliment coming from Burl. Ethan looked at the fence. "The east section here was pulling in 84. I reset 4 posts that summer. They've held." "I noticed," she said. "I wondered if it was you." They kept walking. "I need to tell you something," she said. He looked at her. "Whitmore came back," she said. "Yesterday, while you were writing your letter." He was quiet, waiting. "He came to say goodbye," she said, "properly. He said he understood that the situation had resolved, and that he wished the ranch well, and that he was sorry for the way things had gone, not just with me, but with my father. He said Thomas Carter had deserved a better conversation than the one they'd had at the end." "That was decent of him," Ethan said. "It was," she agreed. "I told him so." She paused. "He asked me directly, he said, 'Is there someone else?' I told him yes." Ethan looked at her. "I told him there had always been someone else," she said simply. "That I hadn't admitted it to myself quickly enough." He nodded and he left, and I think he was not at peace with it, but accepting, which is the best you can ask for in a situation like that. "It is," Ethan said. She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. They stood at the fence, and she turned to face him, and in the summer light with the mountains behind her, and her hair coming loose from its pin, the way it always did by mid-morning, she was exactly herself, not a picture of anything, not an ideal. Exactly precisely herself. "I want to say something," she said. "Say it. When you rode out of this yard 18 months ago." She stopped, steadied herself. "I stood at the window, and I watched you go. I didn't come out because I didn't know what I would say if I did. And I watched until I couldn't see you anymore, and then I stayed at that window for longer than I should have, and then I went back to the account books because that was what there was to do." She looked at him steadily. "And I told myself it was for the best. That it was sensible. That the situation had been impossible, and now it was resolved." A pause. "I was the worst liar I had ever met." Something in his chest cracked open quietly the way important things do. "Abigail," he said. "I'm not finished," she said. "I want to say this whole." She looked at him with everything she had, with all of it unguarded for once. "I am glad the year happened the way it did. I am glad I ran this ranch alone because I know now that I can. I am glad you went north and built something real because you know now that you can. I would not take it back." Her voice was steady and certain. "But I would like to stop wasting time now." He looked at her for a long moment. "That," he said quietly, "is the most direct thing you've ever said to me." "I've been practicing," she said. He took one step toward her. She held her ground, which was what she always did, and looked at him with her chin up and her eyes clear. He said, "I'm not going anywhere. Whatever happens next, I'm not disappearing without a conversation first. That's a promise I can keep." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "I know you can." He reached out and tucked the loose strand of hair behind her ear because it had been bothering him for the last 10 minutes, and because it was the smallest and most natural thing he could think of to do. She did not move away. Her breath caught slightly and then released. "All right," she said softly. "All right," he agreed. They stood at the east fence in the Montana summer with the mountains all around them and the warm, real weight of the life they were going to build together settling into the space between them like something that had always been intended and had simply taken its own time arriving. Then she turned back to the fence line. "There's a post here that's been worrying me," she said, her voice back to its practical register. "Come look at it." He followed. He would keep following. That too was a promise he could keep. The post she had been worried about needed replacing. Ethan pulled it himself the next morning, working before breakfast, while the summer air still had its early coolness, and found what he'd suspected the wood had rotted through at the base, the damage running deeper than the surface had shown. It was the kind of problem that looked manageable until you got close enough to see the real extent of it. He set a new post and packed the earth and tested it with both hands and his full weight before he was satisfied. Abigail came out with coffee while he was finishing. She handed him the cup without ceremony and looked at the new post. "How bad was it?" "Bad enough," he said. "Another season, and it would have brought down that whole section." She looked at it for a moment. "I should have caught it sooner." "You were busy with other things," he said. "Things that mattered more." She looked at him sidelong. "Don't make excuses for my fence line." "Yes, ma'am," he said, and drank his coffee. She almost smiled. Almost. She was careful with her smiles in the morning, as if they were a resource that required managing. He had noticed this was changing, that the careful management was loosening slightly, and he kept that observation to himself, because pointing it out would immediately reverse the process. They were learning each other again. That was what the courtship was, underneath all the practical language they used to describe it. Not relearning, they had not forgotten anything that mattered. But the versions of themselves that stood in that east pasture in the summer of 1885 were not the same people who had worked side by side the summer before, and pretending otherwise would have been a disservice to everything they'd both been through to get here. He was quieter with his assumptions now. She was more direct with her questions. Those two changes alone had rearranged the dynamic between them in ways that were still revealing themselves. "Will wrote back," he said. She looked at him. "And he's managing fine. Says the north section fence is holding. The cattle numbers are up, and he fixed the drainage problem in the upper pasture that I'd been meaning to address for 2 months." He paused. "He's better at this than I was at his age." "What were you like at his age?" she asked. "Stubborn," he said. "Better at starting things than finishing them. Didn't know yet that the finishing is the harder part." She considered that. "You know it now." "Yes," he said. "I learned it the hard way." She looked at the mountains. "Most useful things are learned that way," she said. And it wasn't pointed at him specifically. It was a general observation she was making about both of them, about the year they'd each spent building the people they were now. He understood that. He appreciated it more than an apology. They finished their coffee and went to work. 3 weeks into what they were carefully calling the courtship, though, that word implied a formality that didn't quite fit two people who had already shown each other their worst moments. Gerald Gould made one final move. Ethan heard about it from Burl, who heard it from Roy, who had been in the feed store in Harlan Creek when Gould's man came in asking questions. Not legal questions. Gould was done with legal, the verdict had closed that door firmly. These were social questions, the kind that circulate through a small town, the way water moves through soil slowly, invisibly, and in every direction at once. The questions were about Ethan, about his history before Carter Ranch, about where he had come from and who his family was, and what exactly his arrangement with the late Samuel Reed had looked like, and whether there was anything in the paperwork that didn't hold up to examination. The questions were dressed up as neighborly curiosity and were unmistakably something else. Burl told Ethan on a Thursday evening matter-of-factly the way Burl delivered all information. "Thought you should know," he said, "before it gets back to Abigail in a way that's been shaped by someone else's telling." "Appreciated," Ethan said. He went and found Abigail. She was at the kitchen table with her account books where she was most evenings now that the legal crisis had passed and the ranch was running in its normal rhythm. She looked up when he came in and read something in his face immediately. She set down her pen. "Tell me," she said. He told her. She listened without interrupting, which was one of her considerable qualities. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, her hands flat on the table. "He's not going to find anything in your arrangement with Samuel Reed," she said. It was not a question. "No," Ethan said. "It was done properly with Prescott's equivalent in Bridger. Everything legal and recorded. And your history before Carter Ranch." He looked at her steadily. "I've worked honest jobs in 3 territories since I was 16 years old. There's nothing there that doesn't look exactly like what it is." "Then what is he hoping to find?" "I don't think he's hoping to find anything specific," Ethan said. "I think he's hoping that the asking of questions creates a cloud. That people in town start wondering. That wondering becomes a reason for you to doubt the situation." He kept his voice level. "He's not coming after my reputation. He's coming after yours. Through mine." Abigail looked at him. Her jaw was set. "That's cowardly." "Yes," he said. "It is." She stood up. "I'm going to talk to Prescott tomorrow morning." "That's a good idea," he said. "But I want to say something first." She looked at him, waiting. "If this creates problems for you, if Gould's questions gain enough traction in town to make the work harder, I want you to tell me directly. I am not going to disappear to make it easier. That's not on the table. But I want to know what you're facing, and I want to face it with you." He held her gaze. "Equal decisions, like we said. That means this, too." She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in her expression. Recognition, maybe. The specific recognition of a woman seeing a man do the thing he promised to do the first time he has the chance to do it. "All right," she said. "Equal decisions." "Prescott tomorrow," he said. "I'll come with you." "I know how to speak to my own lawyer," she said. "I know you do," he said. "I'll be there anyway." She looked at him. "You're going to be difficult about this." "I'm going to be present," he said. "Those aren't the same thing." She opened her mouth, closed it, picked up her pen and looked at her account books, and then looked back at him. "Fine," she said in the tone of someone who has decided not to argue a point they've already won. "Fine. 7 o'clock. Don't be late." He was not late. Dad. Prescott listened to the account of Gould's inquiries with the focused attention of a man who had been expecting something like this and was not surprised to see it arrive. "He's fishing," Prescott said. "He lost the legal fight cleanly. This is the next tool in the box social pressure community doubt. It's effective in some situations." He looked at Ethan over his spectacles. "Less effective when the target has a clean record and a willingness to be transparent." "What do you recommend?" Abigail asked. "Transparency," Prescott said simply. "Make Mr. Walker's history publicly available. Not defensively that looks like hiding something. Proactively. The Reed land transfer documentation is a matter of public record in Bridger. I can request a copy and file it here where anyone who wants to look can look. His employment history from the ranches he's worked can be attested by letter from his former employers. A man with nothing to hide is the least interesting target in the world." Ethan nodded. "Do it." Prescott looked at him. "All of it. There's nothing in your history that—" "Nothing," Ethan said. Abigail was looking at him with the assessing expression. "You're sure?" "I've made plenty of mistakes in my life," he said, looking at her directly. "None of them are the kind that look different in daylight than they do at midnight." A pause. "That's what I've tried to be. A man who doesn't have 2 versions of himself." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned back to Prescott. "Do it," she said. "Exactly as you described. And when people in town ask, and they will ask, I'd like them to have accurate information to work with." Prescott made notes. "There's one more thing," he said in the particular tone that meant the difficult part was coming. Gould is also implying through the questions his man is asking that the nature of Mr. Walker's presence on the Carter ranch is irregular, that the arrangement is not clearly defined. Abigail's expression did not change. What kind of irregular? The kind that suggests impropriety, Prescott said with the delicacy of a man who is paid to discuss uncomfortable things without flinching. He is characterizing the situation in a way that raises questions about Miss Carter's personal judgment. The room was very quiet. Abigail sat perfectly still for 3 full seconds. Then she said, "He is calling my character into question." "He is implying it," Prescott said, carefully enough to avoid a direct charge but unmistakably. Ethan felt something cold and clear move through him. Not anger exactly, but its more controlled cousin. The kind of clarity that comes when something becomes simple that had been complicated. "Then we remove the ambiguity," Ethan said. Both Prescott and Abigail looked at him. "The situation is irregular because it's undefined," he said. "That's what Gould is using. Remove the undefined part and you remove the tool." He looked at Abigail. He said it directly the way she had always deserved things to be said. "I know we agreed to take this slowly. I know we said courtship proper, figure out the practical details first. And I meant that. I still mean it. But if Gould is going to use the ambiguity of our situation against you, then I want to end that ambiguity." He paused. "If you'll have me." Prescott found something very interesting to look at in his paperwork. Abigail looked at Ethan with an expression that moved through several things in rapid succession. Surprise, calculation. Something that was neither, but lived between them, and then settled into the clear, direct look that meant she was about to say exactly what she meant. "That," she said, "is an extraordinarily unromantic proposal." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry. I had a better version in mind for later." "Later when Gould wasn't the reason." She looked at him steadily. "And the better version, the one you had in mind for later, is it different in substance or just in timing?" "Just in timing," he said. She was quiet for a long moment. "Then say it now," she said. "The version you had in mind. Not the one about removing ambiguity. The other one." He looked at her across Prescott's desk in the morning light coming through the dusty window, with the old lawyer buried in his paperwork between them, and said the thing he had been carrying for 18 months. "I want to build a life with you," he said. "Not beside yours, with yours. I want to be the person you argue fence lines with and drink bad coffee with and tell the hard things to before you tell anyone else. I want to be the person who is still here when things go wrong and doesn't disappear when the situation gets complicated." He kept his eyes on her. "I know who I am now. I know what I have to offer. And I am asking you directly with nothing decided in advance if you want that. If you want me, not what I can do for the ranch, me." The room was absolutely still. Abigail Carter looked at him with those gray-green eyes that had been reading him accurately from the first day he walked into a freight office and said, "Afternoon," and didn't move. "Yes," she said. The same word she had said in the kitchen 2 weeks ago. But different, fuller, carrying more weight, the weight of everything she'd understood in the weeks between. "Yes, I want that." Prescott cleared his throat. "I'll need a witness," he said without looking up from his paperwork, "for the documentation." They were married in September, not with fanfare, not with the kind of social production that a marriage in Harlan Creek might typically involve, when one party was the Carter Ranch, and the other was a man whose land documents had by then been reviewed by half the town, and found entirely in order. Just the preacher, Burl, and Crow as witnesses, and a small group of people who had known Abigail long enough to have an opinion about what she deserved and were satisfied with what they saw. Ethan wore his cleanest clothes and his good hat, which he removed when the preacher began and did not replace until they were outside. Abigail wore a dress she had made herself from fabric she had ordered in June before the hearing. Before Ethan came back, before any of this, ordered it for a reason she had not named to herself at the time, and understood only in retrospect. She looked exactly like herself. That was the thing that struck him standing beside her while the preacher spoke. She was not dressed for someone else's idea of what the occasion required. She was not performing anything. She was simply there, fully and completely, in the way she was always fully and completely herself. And he thought, this is what I have been afraid of losing since the day I met her. When the preacher asked if he would, he said, "I will," in a voice that came out steadier than he expected, and meant both words with everything he had. When the preacher asked if she would, she looked at Ethan first directly, as if the preacher's question was secondary, and her own answer was what she was checking, and then said, "I will," with the particular certainty she brought to things she had thought through completely. Burl shook Ethan's hand afterward with his full grip and said, "Don't leave again," in a tone that was friendly and absolute. Crow said, "About time," which was more words than he typically used in a full day. Duh. What nobody tells you about the things you've been most afraid of is how quiet they are when they finally arrive. Ethan had expected he wasn't sure what he'd expected. Something more dramatic, perhaps. Something commensurate with the scale of wanting and waiting and the particular discipline of building himself into a person he could respect before coming back to ask for what he wanted. He had expected the getting of it to feel larger. Instead, it felt like the east pasture in the early morning. Like coffee on a cold day. Like a fence post set correctly, both hands testing it and finding it solid, the work done right and built to hold. It felt, in other words, like coming home to a place he had never technically lived. He moved between the two properties through the Fall Carter Ranch and the Reed land, which he was beginning privately to think of as something that needed a better name, now that it was no longer Samuel Reed's alone. He made the ride every 2 weeks, checking in with Will, managing what needed managing, and returning to Harlan Creek with the particular ease of a man who has a reason to return. Will was thriving. The boy had grown into the responsibility the way good people grow into things they were built for, not dramatically, not with fanfare, just steadily, one good decision at a time. He asked better questions than he had in the spring, and argued his reasoning when he thought Ethan was wrong, which Ethan encouraged because Will was right often enough to make the argument worth having. On a Tuesday, in early November, Ethan came back from the Reed land to find Abigail at the kitchen table, with an expression he had not seen before. Not troubled. Not the carefully composed face she used when she was managing something difficult. Something else thoughtful, internal, the expression of a person turning a discovery over in their hands. "What is it?" he said. She looked up. "Sit down." He sat. She slid a letter across the table to him. It was from a man named Aldrich in the capital, a land attorney Prescott had referred her to in the spring for a secondary matter related to the estate. It was 2 pages. He read it. When he finished, he looked up. "Gould's freight operation," he said, "is under federal investigation," she said, "for coercive contract practices, not just with us, with 6 other operations in 3 territories. She folded her hands. "Aldrich says our documentation from Prescott, the pattern evidence, the statements from the Valley operators, was part of what prompted the investigation. We were not the only ones. We were just the ones who fought back." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "How long has this been building?" "Aldrich says it started last spring when an operator in the Eastern Territory went to a federal marshal instead of a territorial court." She looked at the letter. "Gould's entire business model has been this: finding operations in transition, creating phantom agreements using legal pressure to extract settlements." She paused. "He never expected anyone to have the documentation to prove the pattern." "You had the documentation," Ethan said. "Prescott had the documentation," she said, "because you told us about the North Pasture encounter in 1884. She looked at him steadily. "That was the piece that showed it was premeditated. Without that piece, we would have won the hearing, but the federal case might never have connected to us." He thought about that. "It won't undo what Gould put you through," he said. "No," she agreed. "But it means other operations won't go through it." She looked at the letter again. "Aldrich says they may call on me for testimony in the federal proceedings, in the capital. Will you go?" She looked at him with an expression that said the question did not require much deliberation. "Of course," she said. "Burl can manage for a week. "I'll come with you," he said. She opened her mouth. "Not to speak for you," he said immediately. "Not to manage anything. Because the capital is a long ride and I'd like to see it, and because you shouldn't have to make that trip alone unless you want to." He paused. "Do you want to?" She looked at him. The careful assessment, the weighing. Then, "No," she said. "I don't want to make it alone." "Then I'll come," he said simply. She nodded, slid the letter back toward herself, and filed it in the stack of papers she kept in their proper order on the right side of the table. Then she looked at him with that expression that was becoming familiar. Not the assessing one, not the composed one. The one that was only for him, that she still deployed with the care of someone who knows the value of what they're offering. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah, I'm glad you didn't stay gone," she said. Not the first time she'd said it, she had said variations of it several times since September, each time differently, as if she were trying out different ways of expressing the same essential thing. Each version was true in a slightly different way. "Me too," he said. The federal testimony took place in February, in a courtroom that was larger and colder and more formal than anything Harlan Creek offered. Abigail testified for 2 hours. She was precise, factual, and utterly unintimidated by the federal attorneys on either side of the proceeding, which drew a murmured comment from the federal prosecutor that Ethan sitting in the gallery was close enough to overhear. "That woman knows her case better than most lawyers I've worked with." He did not tell her that afterward. He didn't need to. She knew it herself, which was more important. Gould was present in the courtroom with his legal team and did not look at Abigail once during her testimony, which Ethan took to be the clearest indication of the man's character. A person can disagree with someone and still look at them. The refusal to look is something else. When it was over, and they were outside in the February cold, Abigail stood for a moment on the courthouse steps, and just breathed the long exhale of someone setting down something heavy. Ethan stood beside her and let her have it. "That's the last of it," she said. "Yes," he said. "I'm ready to go home," she said. He looked at her. "Which one?" She turned her head and looked at him, a look that started as the assessing expression and became something warmer. "Both," she said. "In the right order." They rode back the way they had come through the winter bear country and talked the way they had learned to talk, not filling silence for its own sake, but saying the things that needed saying and letting the rest breathe. They talked about Will, who had written with a cattle question that demonstrated he'd been thinking 3 seasons ahead. They talked about the North Pasture irrigation improvement Ethan had been planning since October. They talked about a trade relationship Abigail wanted to develop with an Operation 2 Valleys over and about, whether the east section of the Reedland could support a second herd, and about what name made sense for the combined operation when they were both working both properties. "Walker Carter," she said. "Carter Walker," he said. She looked at him. "Why Carter first?" "Because the Carter Ranch came first," he said. "And because you fought for it. And because you ran it alone for a year when nobody thought you could, and you were right and they were wrong, and that ought to be in the name." She was quiet for a moment. "Walker Carter," she said. "Because Walker came back." He looked at her. "Walker came back," she said again quietly, and it was not just about the name. He reached across and took her hand, which he had not done before on horseback, which was impractical and slightly awkward, and something neither of them would ever mention to Burl. She did not pull away. She adjusted her grip to something more workable and kept riding. They rode like that for a while. Spring came. The way spring comes to Montana, not gently, not with the careful gradations of more forgiving climates, but all at once, and then pulling back, and then all at once again, testing everything to see what was built to last. Carter Walker Ranch, which was what it appeared on the combined paperwork Prescott filed in April, turned out to be built to last. The first summer under the new arrangement was the hardest and the best simultaneously. Hard because 2 operations coming together create twice the decisions, and the decisions don't always align cleanly. And there were arguments, real ones with raised voices and stubborn silences. And at least one occasion when Abigail walked out of the barn and Ethan let her go, and then came and found her 20 minutes later and said simply, "I was wrong about the East herd rotation. Your numbers were right." And she had said, "I know, but you were right about the water allocation schedule, and I wasn't going to say so until you said yours first." Base Ausai, Usai. And he had looked at her and started laughing, which was not something he had done easily in a long time. And after a moment, she had laughed too, which was something she almost never did. All the way, always half-managed, half-released, but this time was all the way, and it changed something in the air between them permanently. Best because the operation was genuinely better together than separate. Not because one of them was the stronger manager. They were differently strong, which was not the same thing as one being better. But because the things Abigail was best at, and the things Ethan was best at, did not overlap cleanly, which meant neither of them was redundant. She carried the numbers, and the relationships, and the long-term strategy. He carried the daily management of the land, and the cattle, and the practical problem-solving that the earth requires. Between them, there were very few gaps. Will came to Carter Walker in June and took over the Reedlands daily operation with the confidence of a young man who had earned it. He was 21 and looked 40 in the way that outdoor work makes young men look. He was good, and he knew it, and had not yet gotten arrogant about knowing it, which was the best window in a man's development. Ethan was honest with him about that. "You're at the point where you know enough to be dangerous to yourself," he told Will one morning at the Reed property fence line. "The best thing you can do right now is stay humble about the 1 or 2% you don't know yet." Will looked at him. "How do I know which 1 or 2% it is?" "You don't," Ethan said. "That's the whole problem." He drove a nail. "You assume it exists. You look for it actively. You thank people who show it to you instead of arguing." Will was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you did?" Ethan thought about an old man named Samuel Reed saying, "That's not noble, that's just afraid." "Eventually," he said. "I got there eventually." In the second summer, Gould's federal case concluded with a settlement and a permanent injunction against his freight practices in 3 territories. Prescott sent word, and Abigail read the letter at the breakfast table and said, "Good," and set it aside and asked Ethan to pass the coffee. He handed her the coffee and waited. She looked at him. "I'm not going to make a speech about it," she said. "I know," he said. "It's over," she said. "That's enough." "That's plenty," he agreed. She drank her coffee. He drank his. The morning came in through the kitchen window the way it always did. "There's a section of fence in the north pasture that needs looking at," she said. "I saw it yesterday," he said. "I'll get to it this morning." "Burl thinks it's the same problem you fixed in the east section 2 summers ago. Rot at the base." "Probably," he said. "Same summer heat, same soil drainage pattern." She nodded, making the note in her head the way she always did efficiently. Precisely no motion wasted. Then she looked at him with that expression, the one that was only for him. "I have something to tell you," she said. He looked at her. She told him. He was very still for a moment. Then he set down his coffee cup very carefully with both hands, the way a man handles something he is suddenly afraid of dropping. "You're sure?" he said. "I'm sure," she said. He looked at her across the kitchen table, across the account books, and the morning coffee, and the accumulated ordinary weight of a life built carefully out of all the right materials, and felt something move through him that he did not have a name for. Something that was larger than happiness, and quieter than joy, and more permanent than either. "Abigail," he said. "Don't," she said, and her voice was rough around the edges. "Don't say something that makes me cry before breakfast. I have a full day." "I wasn't going to say anything," he said. "I was just going to say your name." She looked at him. Her eyes were bright. "You say it differently than you used to," she said. "Do I?" "Since we married," she said. "You say it like it means something specific, not just a name." He looked at her steadily. "It does," he said. "It always did." She pressed her lips together, looked at the table, looked back at him. "The fence?" She said, her voice back to its practical register, but softer. "You should get to it early, before the heat." "I will," he said. He stood. He picked up his hat. He stopped beside her chair and put his hand on her shoulder, just his hand steady and certain, the way he did everything that mattered, and felt her cover it with her own. They stayed like that for a moment in the kitchen in the summer morning, in the life they had built out of leaving and returning and learning and finally staying. Then he put on his hat and went to see to the fence, and she turned back to her books. And the morning went on around them, full and ordinary and exactly right. Years later, when people in the valley around Harlan Creek talked about the Carter Walker operation, and they did talk about it because it was the kind of place that gave people something to talk about, they said different things depending on who was talking. Some said it was the best-run ranch in the territory. Some said it was proof that a woman could build as well as any man and better than most. Some said it was the story of a cowboy who came back when he could have stayed gone. All of them were right, but none of them knew the part that mattered most. The part that happened in ordinary mornings at a kitchen table, in conversations about fence lines and water schedules and coffee passed across a table by someone who knew exactly how you took it. The part that was built not from grand gestures and dramatic arrivals, but from the daily decision to stay, to show up to say the hard thing directly, and hear the hard thing without flinching. Ethan Walker had ridden out of a yard one morning with his hat tipped to the mountains and told himself he was doing the right thing. He had been wrong. The right thing had been harder and smaller and more specific than noble sacrifice. The right thing had been this, a woman's name said like it meant something. A hand on a shoulder. A fence post set correctly and tested with both hands. Staying when it was easier to go. Showing up when you weren't sure you were wanted. Saying the true things out loud instead of burning it. He had learned all of that the hard way, the only way things worth knowing ever get learned. And every morning he woke up in the life he had almost not come back for. He was grateful, not with words, because gratitude was not a thing he was naturally articulate about, but with his hands and his presence, and the steady, unspectacular faithfulness of a man who had finally understood what it meant to be worthy of something. Not because someone had given him land or a name or a position, because he had chosen every day to be the person that kind of life required. That was the whole of it. That was enough. That was in the end, everything.